All right, Leah, thank you so much for being with us. If you could just quickly introduce yourself and let us know your involvement with this project.
Hi, my name is Leah. Um, I was part of the storytelling event with Amy. I've also taken some of Becca's theater workshop classes, like the director intensive workshop and the playwriting workshop.
So, Leah, since you've had some experience, you've done storytelling in a couple of different venues now, with Amy and with Can you tell us what that storytelling process is like for you?
For me, it's a matter of like working with someone to come up with like a brainstorm and outline, and then going on my own to create, the bulk of my story from what our outline and brainstorm ended up being, and then having someone review it for edits and adjusting the length when need be, and then talking about it and making sure we're all good before sending the final draft.
You've done it.
And
You've done
presenting it
storytelling.
for
I'm
doing
sorry.
an event.
Because I know that you've been interviewed in the past for various things, and so I wonder what why do you like telling stories in your own words like this? How is that different from like being interviewed or something like that?
Well, when you're
From
being
acting.
interviewed, you never really know whether or not your words are going to be put out exactly the way you say them. And oftentimes, whoever the interviewer is can oftentimes put their own spin on what you're saying or misinterpret something that you're saying. And it can be said in a way that maybe reflects negatively on you or on them. Um, or maybe, it's not being told in the way you were hoping it's being told, or it's being used in a way you never intended it to be used for. Whereas if you're the one presenting it and you're doing it in your own words, you have complete control over those things.
When you're interviewed for something, they want to talk to you about one specific thing, but you have not only control of how you tell your story with storytelling, but you get to pick what it's about too. And
Right.
so it might not be something that somebody would ask you about in an interview.
Very good points. Very good points.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, Leah, if you were willing to share a little bit about your self-advocacy experience too.
Of course. A lot of my self-advocacy comes from me being a part of a theater group. I'm part of a nonprofit theater group for adults and teens with disabilities of any kind called Detour Company Theater. And I get a lot of my advocacy work done there. I'm on the board of directors, and one of my jobs as one of the actor representatives on our board is to help to be the voice of the actors and other team members of the group. And it definitely involves a lot of advocacy, both self-advocacy and advocacy for others with disabilities, because you have to include thoughts from both your side and the side of the others in the group. And it also involves a lot of integrity. You have to make sure that you're actually putting out the truth.
So do you see there being a connection between the self-advocacy work that you do and the storytelling?
I definitely do. I think storytelling can be a form of self-advocacy too, especially if you're telling, your own story in your own words about something that, maybe other people are struggling with also.
Mm.
It lets the audience know they're not alone, that they're not the only ones feeling like that. And I think it's a great way to, to be able to advocate for them and give them helpful advice within your story.
Tell us a little bit about your experience with journalism. How do you consume the news?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase your question?
Sure, of course. Becca, do you have a better way of?
Yeah. So, I just a little bit, since this is a journalism event that we're presenting at here, just a little bit about, do you watch the news? Do you read the news? Do you talk about the news with people? How do you get your news?
I definitely do a mix of watching and reading, most of which I do online because everything is easily updated and I don't have to deal with worrying about, it being in plain text or non-plain text. Oftentimes you can find articles on the same news event that are done in different ways and different styles.
Can you give an example of that if you have one?
Yeah, I can. So Amy does journalism herself, and on her website for the event that we did with her on journalism, she posted both plain text versions of the stories that the speakers shared, and not so plain text stories that stories people had shared.
And did you notice a difference?
Oh yeah, the plain text I think would be a lot easier for people with disabilities or people who struggle with reading. It'll be a lot easier for them to understand. Whereas the ones that aren't, it gets really, really technical. And I think unless you can know and understand fully what you're reading, it can be hard to process what they're actually talking about.
Sure.
Do you have any advice? Oh, sorry, go on.
Have you seen that anywhere else? That kind of thing where it presents the story in a couple of different ways?
Not as far as I can tell.
Yeah, that's what we're thinking too, right? So that's something that Amy and I work on together. And we've had trouble finding in other places too. And so it's really it's good to hear that that's useful.
Well, I guess sometimes it happens in books. Sometimes, like if you're reading a book that's in a different language, they'll put the English translation in it. Or like if you're doing old, like a book that was originally done in Old English, a lot of times you can find copies that have the Old English on one side and the normal modern day English on the other.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
right.
translations happen. Yeah.
Right. Or books that do like bullet points at the end of a chapter, like major points, things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Leah, do you have any advice for journalists who are covering people with disabilities?
Yeah, I definitely do. Try and go directly to the source. You never really know the truth about what's happening in the world with people with disabilities unless you ask those who are actually experiencing them currently firsthand. Also, make sure you tell it from their perspective and use their words and not just your own. A lot of times it's very important to people with disabilities that what they're saying isn't turned around or said in a way that could reflect negatively on them or the community or the people that are interviewing them.
Just like everybody feels that way, right? Yeah, that's a really incredible point.
Can I ask a question? Have you like encountered that news about people with disabilities will do that sometimes, will present people with disabilities in a way that you don't necessarily agree with?
I definitely think it's been done a lot. I think not just in news, but oftentimes uh, in in books, TV shows, and other various forms of the media. A lot of times, normal people or people without disabilities, they tend to see people with disabilities in a very negative light. And I think a lot of that can be changed the more and more that self advocacy and journalism reflects on that and does something about it to change it.
So I have a tricky question for you, and I don't know the answer to this one. I don't know if Becca does either, but it's something that I think about a lot. It keeps me up at night sometimes. Your point about asking the people with disabilities themselves the question is phenomenal, and it's really at the heart of everything that Becca and I are doing, I think, with our work. But the reality is that there are going to be people sometimes who we're not able to pose a question to in a traditional way, who don't communicate in the in the same ways that we do. They communicate, but maybe a journalist wouldn't be able to really understand what was going on unless they knew them really well. So if that's the case, if something's happening to a person with a disability and a journalist knows about it and they can't ask the person with the disability themselves, what advice do you have for that journalist?
I would say go somewhere as closely directly to the source as you can. I would maybe say like a parent or a caregiver or someone that is like like the caseworker, someone like that. Oftentimes family members that they're living with, or their caregivers, or their caseworkers, they have an equal understanding on, what they're going through and what it's like.
And I think I might add to that too. Thank you, Leah. I think that's really good advice. That I think that it would also be in that instance, it would be important to contextualize that with other experiences of people with disabilities who are experiencing similar things, right? So I think
Can you give us an example?
So for example, if you're doing a story specifically about, something that's occurring in a group home, and the focus of your story is someone who you don't have access to, or you're not able to communicate with in the way that you would hope to, that you can also gather kind of contextual experiences of other people living in group homes, right? So I think often, journalists are trying to bring to light things that are not just happening to one person, but things that are happening systemically, right? And so even if the focus of your story might be a person that you don't get access to for gatekeeping reasons, or there's other reasons that you can't communicate, that there are kind of other stories that would help to contextualize that.
Absolutely. And there are definitely journalism techniques that we all use to make sure that that works, in a true and ethical way. Like, you'd have to be very transparent and say, this was not the experience of this person, but there are people in similar experiences or similar situations who've experienced X, Y, and Z. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good
really excellent point. I completely agree.
Yeah, because I think, Leah, that you're right, that of course, parents and caregivers have important perspectives to give, but they are not the same perspectives, right? They're offering kind of a different angle of the same situation often.
Right. I also think, if you are getting it from a parent or caregiver, maybe ask them, to communicate with the person that you're trying to do the story on. And maybe they understand what they're trying to say better than the journalist is, and they can relay that to the journalist.
That is also excellent advice. And I would say, as a journalist, my ultimate goal would always be to first interview the person with the disability, but then to be able to also interview people around them, because that's how you report a story. You try to report it from all sides to figure out what's going on. It's just that the person with the disability should be centered in the story, because that's who it's about.
Right. And that has historically, I think, Leah, what you were saying, historically has not been what's happened, right?
Oh.
Right. I think another thing journalists can do is not just include writing, but include other forms of self-expression or storytelling in with the actual writing pieces. Maybe someone can't talk or can't write, but they can draw really well. Maybe get them to draw something for you.
We're talking about doing a storytelling event that's around drawing.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah. You're ahead of the curve.
A great idea, Leah. Yeah.
I want to be a part of that if at all
possible. Will you?
Absolutely.
Okay. We're going to bring you in as an instructor. You heard it here first, folks. Becca, do you have any more questions for Leah?
I don't think so, Leah. I'll just leave it to you if there's anything else that you want to. Again, our audience here are journalists and editors, and what can they do to better include people with disabilities in their work?
Yeah, I think the last few things I have to say are just be careful about how you go about it. A lot of times people with disabilities can be intimidated by journalists, and a lot of times it's because they don't know what your intentions are up front. So I think the way that you go about interviewing them is very, very important to be done in a very positive and calm, peaceful kind of environment and way. And I also think it's important that journalists realize that not all people with disabilities are going to want to share the stories, because I think
just like regular people, not regular, just like anybody, right? Just like anybody. Not everybody wants to share their story. Yeah.
And if that happens, don't pry, don't pressure them. You want it to come freely and come from the heart. Otherwise, it's not worth journalism about.
Excellent. Yeah. Nobody owes you their story. That is such a good note to end on.
Put that on a t-shirt.
Well, thank you so much, Leah. This has been really great.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you
really
so much
appreciate
for
your
inviting
time.
me to be a part of the event.
Of course, of course. Enjoy camp. Next time we'll have you on live.
Of course.
Okay. Take
Yes.
care.
Bye.